Mom had been planning this dinner for weeks. She kept calling me, asking what I wanted her to make, reminding me to dress nicely because it was a special occasion. My brother Jake had finally gotten married after years of dating around, and this was supposed to be our first real family celebration since their courthouse wedding back in March. I spent way too long picking out an outfit that Saturday afternoon. Everything felt wrong somehow. Too tight, too loose, too formal, not formal enough. I finally settled on a navy blue dress that I'd worn to my cousin's graduation last year. It was comfortable, at least, and Mom always said navy looked good on me. The smell of garlic and rosemary hit me as soon as I walked through my parents' front door. Dad was in his usual spot in the living room, watching some baseball game with the volume turned up too loud. Mom rushed out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, giving me one of those long hugs that made me feel like I was 12 again. "She's beautiful, honey," Mom whispered in my ear about Camilla. "You're going to love her." I wasn't so sure about that. I'd only met Camilla once before, briefly, at a coffee shop downtown, when Jake first started dating her. She'd seemed nice enough then, but there was something about the way she looked at me that made me feel like I was being evaluated. Like I didn't quite measure up to some standard I didn't even know existed. When they arrived, Jake looked happier than I'd seen him in years. He was wearing a button-down shirt I'd never seen before, and his hair was styled differently. Camilla walked in behind him like she owned the place. She was one of those women who just commanded attention without even trying. Tall, with perfect posture, wearing a white sundress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Sarah!" Jake hugged me tight. "You remember Camilla?" "Of course." I smiled, extending my hand. "Congratulations again on the wedding." Camilla's handshake was firm, brief. Her smile was perfect, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you. You look comfortable." There was something in the way she said it that made my stomach twist, but I brushed it off. Maybe I was just being sensitive. Dinner started out normal enough. Dad carved the roast beef while Mom fussed over whether the potatoes were too salty. Jake told us about their honeymoon in Napa, how they'd stayed at this incredible bed and breakfast, and done wine tastings every day. Camilla added details here and there, always making everything sound more expensive and exclusive than Jake's version. I was reaching for my second dinner roll when Camilla said, "Sarah, you must really love bread." Everyone kept eating like nothing had happened, but I felt my face get hot. I put the roll back on the serving plate. "She's always been our little foodie," Mom said, trying to smooth things over. "That's sweet," Camilla replied. "I've never really had much of an appetite. Jake's always telling me I need to eat more, but I just forget sometimes." The conversation moved on to other things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that every bite I took was being watched and judged. When Mom brought out the apple pie she'd made from scratch, Camilla declined, saying she was absolutely stuffed, even though she'd barely touched her dinner. I wanted pie desperately, but I passed too, mumbling something about being too full. "Are you sure?" Mom asked, disappointed. "It's your favorite." "I'm really full, Mom. Maybe later." Camilla smiled at me across the table. "That's probably smart. Summer's coming up and swimsuit season is always tricky." Jake laughed uncomfortably. Dad kept eating his pie like he hadn't heard anything. Mom started clearing plates, moving faster than usual. I excused myself to use the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror for a long minute, trying to figure out what was happening. Was I imagining things? Was Camilla really being mean? Or was I just being oversensitive like always? I looked at myself in the mirror and saw exactly what she probably saw. Someone who ate too much bread, who passed on dessert but probably shouldn't have, who wore comfortable clothes because the alternative was admitting that nothing else fit right anymore. When I came back to the dining room, everyone was standing around talking about Jake's new job at the marketing firm downtown. I started gathering plates to help Mom clean up, grateful to have something to do with my hands. That's when Camilla appeared beside me, so close I could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral that probably had a French name. "No man is ever going to love you," she said quietly, her voice as casual as if she was commenting on the weather. "You're just a fat, pathetic leftover." The words hit me like a slap. I dropped the fork I was holding, and it clattered against the plate. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just stood there, staring at her, waiting for her to take it back. or laugh like it was some terrible joke, but she just smiled that perfect smile and walked away to rejoin the conversation. I grabbed my purse and muttered something to Mom about having an early morning. I hugged everyone goodbye quickly, avoiding eye contact, and practically ran to my car. I could barely see to drive home through the tears that started falling before I even backed out of the driveway. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes before I could even get out. The words kept playing over and over in my head like a broken record. Fat, pathetic leftover. No man is ever going to love you. Each time they repeated, they cut a little deeper. My apartment felt different when I walked in. Everything looked the same, but somehow smaller, sadder. The couch where I spent most of my evenings watching Netflix. The kitchen counter covered with takeout menus. The mirror by the front door that I'd been avoiding for months. I kicked off my shoes and walked straight to my bedroom, but I couldn't bring myself to change out of the dress yet. Instead, I sat on the floor at the foot of my bed, still in my dinner clothes, and just let myself fall apart. The crying started slow, then came in waves, big, ugly sobs that made my chest ache. I hadn't cried like this since college, when my boyfriend Matt broke up with me right before graduation. But this felt worse somehow. Matt had been cruel, but he'd been cruel in anger. Camilla had been cruel with calculation. She'd meant every word. I caught sight of myself in the full-length mirror across from my bed and barely recognized what I saw. My makeup was streaked down my cheeks in black lines. My hair was a mess from running my hands through it. The navy dress that had seemed like such a safe choice now looked like exactly what it was. Something to hide in. When had I become this person? When had I started choosing clothes based on what would hide me best, instead of what I actually liked? When had I stopped looking in mirrors unless I absolutely had to? I thought about all the times I'd made excuses to skip social events. The wedding invitations I'd declined because I didn't want to shop for a dress. The work happy hours I'd avoided because I was tired of being the only one who didn't get asked to dance when we went out afterward. The dating apps I'd downloaded and deleted without ever posting a photo. Around midnight, I got up and went to the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator and stared at the contents like they might have some answers. Leftover Chinese food from Thursday. A half-empty bottle of wine from who knows when. Some yogurt that was probably expired. Not exactly the picture of someone who had her life together. I pulled out the wine and poured myself a glass, then sat at my little kitchen table and really looked around my apartment for the first time in months. When had everything gotten so messy? There were clothes draped over chairs, magazines stacked on every surface, dishes in the sink that I'd been meaning to wash for days. This was my life. This was what Camilla had seen when she looked at me. Someone who had given up without even realizing it. Someone who ordered takeout instead of cooking. Who wore stretched-out sweaters instead of clothes that fit. Who spent Friday nights alone because it was easier than trying. The worst part was that she wasn't entirely wrong. I had become a leftover. Not because of my weight or my clothes or any of the surface things she'd focused on, but because I'd stopped trying. I'd stopped believing I deserved better. I'd been living like I was waiting for my real life to start someday, but doing nothing to make that happen. I finished the wine and poured another glass. Then another. I wanted to stop thinking. Stop replaying the dinner. Stop seeing that smug look on Camilla's face. But the alcohol just made everything sharper, more painful. By 3 a.m, I was exhausted, but wide awake. I'd gone through every emotion possible. Anger, sadness, shame, self-pity. I'd called Camilla every name I could think of. I'd planned elaborate revenge scenarios that I'd never have the courage to carry out. I'd felt sorry for myself until even I was sick of it. But as the sun started to come up, something shifted. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was just hitting rock bottom so hard that the only way left was up. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror as I washed my face, and instead of looking away like usual, I really looked. I saw someone who had been hiding for a long time. Someone who had let fear and insecurity make all her decisions. Someone who had been so afraid of failing that she'd stopped trying altogether. But I also saw someone who wasn't done yet. Someone who had let one terrible person's opinion become the truth when it didn't have to be. I was 28 years old. I had a decent job, my own place, people who loved me. I had time to figure this out. I had time to become whoever I wanted to be. Standing there in my bathroom at sunrise, Still wearing my rumpled dress from dinner, I made myself a promise. I was going to prove Camilla wrong. Not for her, not even for my family, but for me. I was going to stop being afraid of taking up space in the world. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I was done hiding. I barely slept that night, but I was wide awake when my alarm went off at 7. For the first time in months, I had somewhere to be on a Sunday morning. The gym I chose was one of those big chain places about 15 minutes from my apartment. I'd driven past it 1,000 times, but never even considered going inside. It looked intimidating from the outside, with its floor-to-ceiling windows showing off all the perfect bodies inside, but it was also the cheapest option. And I figured if I was going to fail at this, at least I wouldn't go broke doing it. I spent 20 minutes in the parking lot, watching people go in and out. Everyone looked like they belonged there. The women wore matching workout sets that probably cost more than my monthly gym membership. The men carried water bottles the size of small children and looked like they could bench press my car. Finally, I forced myself to get out before I could change my mind. I'd thrown on an old t-shirt from college and a pair of black leggings that I usually wore to bed. I felt completely ridiculous, but I walked through those doors anyway. The girl at the front desk couldn't have been more than 20, with perfectly white teeth and the kind of tan that comes from actual sunshine, not a bottle. She signed me up for a membership with so much enthusiasm that I almost felt guilty for being there under such pathetic circumstances. "Would you like a tour?" she asked, and I nodded, because I had no idea what else to do. The tour was overwhelming. She showed me the weight room, where serious-looking people lifted things that seemed impossibly heavy. The cardio area, where rows of people ran and cycled and climbed stairs to nowhere. The group fitness studios, where classes with names like Body Combat and Insanity were happening. "We also have personal trainers available," she said as we walked past a guy who looked like he belonged in a magazine. "They can help you set up a program that's right for your fitness level." I almost said no automatically. Personal trainers were for people who knew what they were doing, not people who were there because their sister-in-law had called them fat and pathetic. But then I thought about standing in my bathroom that morning, making promises to myself that I wasn't sure I could keep. "Maybe," I said. "Can I think about it?" She gave me a card with her name on it and told me to let her know if I had any questions. Then she left me alone in this enormous space full of equipment I'd never seen before, surrounded by people who looked like they'd never eaten a carb in their lives. I started with the treadmill because it seemed the least likely to kill me. I climbed on and pressed buttons until it started moving, then spent the next 15 minutes walking at a pace that probably would have been challenging for my grandmother. But I was moving, and that felt like something. The woman on the treadmill next to me was running at a speed that made me dizzy just watching her. She had earbuds in and was completely focused on whatever was playing on the little TV screen, but I kept glancing over at her, trying to figure out how she made it look so easy. After the treadmill, I wandered around the weight area, pretending I knew what I was doing. I tried a few machines that looked safe enough, following the little instruction diagrams stuck to the sides. Most of them were harder than they looked, and I could feel my face getting red with effort after just a few repetitions. There was a moment when I caught a glimpse of myself in one of the mirrors that covered the walls, and I almost left right then. I looked exactly like what I was, someone who had no business being there. My face was flushed, my hair was already coming out of its ponytail, and I was pretty sure I was doing everything wrong. But then I remembered Camilla's voice, calm and certain. "No man is ever going to love you." And instead of making me want to hide, this time it made me angry enough to stay. I found a corner where there were some mats, and tried to remember yoga poses from a DVD I'd bought years ago and never used. Most of them were harder than I remembered, but I managed to hold a few for more than a few seconds without falling over. By the time I left, I was exhausted and sweaty and pretty sure I'd done everything wrong. But I'd done something. I'd shown up. I'd tried. The next morning, everything hurt. Muscles I'd forgotten I had were sore. Getting out of bed was an adventure, but I went back anyway. The second day was just as hard as the first. Maybe harder because now I knew what I was in for. But I stayed longer this time, tried a few more machines, walked a little faster on the treadmill. By the end of the first week, I'd figured out a routine of sorts. 20 minutes on the treadmill, some time on the machines that didn't require too much coordination, and a few minutes stretching on the mats. It wasn't much, but it was consistent. The personal trainer, whose name was Marcus, started saying hello to me when he saw me. He was probably just being polite, but it made me feel less invisible. One day, he asked if I wanted him to show me how to use some of the equipment properly. "I don't want to bother you," I said, because I was pretty sure personal trainers were expensive, and I was pretty sure I couldn't afford expensive. "It's not a bother," he said. "Everyone starts somewhere. Let me show you a few things that might help." He spent 20 minutes with me, adjusting my form on machines I'd been using wrong, showing me how to set up the weights properly. He didn't make me feel stupid for not knowing things that probably seemed obvious to him. "The most important thing is just showing up," he said as we finished. "Everything else you can learn." I thought about that on the drive home. Just showing up. It seemed so simple, but it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Every day, I had to choose to get up, put on my workout clothes, and walk through those doors. Every day, I had to choose to believe that I deserved to be there, even when everything in my head told me I didn't. But I kept showing up, even when I was tired, even when I was sore, even when I caught people looking at me and wondered what they were thinking. Because somewhere between the treadmill and the weight machines and the stretching mats, I was starting to remember something I'd forgotten. I was stronger than I thought I was. 3 months in, something clicked. I can't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but one morning I woke up and realized I was actually looking forward to going to the gym. Not dreading it, not forcing myself, but actually excited to see what I could do that day. Marcus had convinced me to try some of the group fitness classes. "You're stronger than you think," he'd said, after watching me struggle through a particularly challenging workout. "But you need to stop being afraid of pushing yourself." The first class I tried was called Body Pump, which sounded terrifying but turned out to be just weightlifting with music. I stood in the back corner, using the lightest weights available, but I made it through the entire hour without dying. The instructor, a tiny woman named Kelly, who could probably deadlift a truck, gave me a high five afterward. "Great job today," she said. "See you next week?" I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I meant it. But I did come back the next week, and the week after that. Eventually, I moved up from the back corner to the middle of the room. I started using heavier weights. I learned the names of the exercises and stopped having to watch everyone else to figure out what I was supposed to be doing. The changes started small. My jeans fit differently. I could walk up the stairs to my apartment without getting winded. I slept better at night, but the bigger changes were happening inside my head. I started cooking real meals instead of ordering takeout every night. It began out of necessity. I was hungry all the time now that I was working out regularly, and restaurant food was expensive. But I found that I actually enjoyed it. There was something satisfying about chopping vegetables and following recipes, about creating something nourishing with my own hands. I cleaned my apartment properly for the first time in months. Not just shoving things in closets, but actually organizing, getting rid of clothes that didn't fit, books I'd never read, kitchen gadgets I'd never used. I wanted my space to reflect who I was becoming, not who I'd been. 6 months in, I ran into my coworker Jennifer at the grocery store. I was in the produce section, filling my cart with ingredients for a stir-fry recipe I'd found online, when she appeared next to me. "Sarah?" she said, like she wasn't sure it was really me. "Wow, you look amazing. Have you been working out?" I felt my face get warm, but not from embarrassment this time, from pride. "Yeah, I joined a gym a few months ago." "It really shows," she said. "You look so confident." Confident. That was a word I'd never associated with myself before. But she was right. I stood differently now. I looked people in the eye when I talked to them. I spoke up in meetings at work instead of just sitting quietly and hoping no one would notice me. I started saying yes to things I would have automatically declined before. When Jennifer invited me to her birthday party, I went. When my neighbor asked if I wanted to join her book club, I said sure. When my cousin asked me to be in her wedding, I didn't immediately panic about having to wear a dress in front of people. The dating thing happened gradually. I'd been so focused on the gym and work and figuring out who I was becoming that I hadn't really thought about men. But then I started noticing them noticing me. The guy at the coffee shop who always smiled when I ordered my usual. The man at the grocery store who helped me reach something on a high shelf and lingered to chat. The personal trainer at the gym who wasn't Marcus, but always found reasons to come over and adjust my form. I downloaded a dating app on a whim one Saturday afternoon. I spent an hour taking photos, trying to find ones that showed who I was now instead of who I'd been. It felt scary and exciting at the same time. David was the third guy I matched with. He was a teacher, divorced, with a genuine smile and kind eyes. We texted for a week before he asked me to meet for coffee. I said yes, before I could talk myself out of it. The night before our date, I stood in front of my closet for an hour, trying on different outfits. But this time, it wasn't because I was trying to hide. It was because I wanted to look good. I wanted to show him the best version of myself. We met at a little cafe downtown that I'd never been to before. I got there first and spent 10 minutes sitting in my car, giving myself a pep talk. You deserve to be here, I told myself. You deserve to be happy. David was even better looking in person than in his photos. He stood up when I walked in, which was a detail I appreciated. We talked for 2 hours about books and movies and travel. He asked about my job, my hobbies, my family. He listened to my answers like they actually mattered. When he walked me to my car, he asked if I'd like to have dinner sometime. I said yes, without hesitation. I had a really good time, he said. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I asked. He smiled. I don't know. But this was better. I drove home with the windows down and music turned up, feeling like I was floating. When I got to my apartment, I called my mom. I went on a date, I said, as soon as she answered. A date? She sounded surprised but happy. Tell me everything. I did. I told her about David, about coffee, about how normal and easy it had felt. I told her about the gym, about my new routine, about how different I felt these days. You sound happy, she said when I finished. Really happy. I haven't heard you sound like this in years. She was right. I was happy. Not just content or okay, but actually happy. I'd forgotten what that felt like. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone I recognized. Not the girl who'd cried on her bedroom floor after that awful dinner, but not a completely different person either. I saw someone who'd been there all along, just waiting for the chance to grow. The invitation came on a Tuesday, delivered by my mother in person instead of through the mail. She showed up at my apartment with takeout from my favorite Thai place, and that look she got when she was trying to be casual about something that definitely wasn't casual. Your father and I are throwing a little party, she said, setting the food on my kitchen counter. For Jake and Camilla's first anniversary, just family and a few close friends. Nothing fancy. I could tell she was nervous about asking me. We hadn't talked about what happened at that dinner a year ago, but she wasn't stupid. She'd noticed how I'd left early, how I'd made excuses to skip the next few family gatherings, how I'd been distant for months afterward. When? I asked, though I was already pretty sure I knew the answer. Saturday afternoon. Just a casual thing in the backyard. You don't have to stay long if you don't want to. I thought about it while we ate. A year ago, the idea of seeing Camilla again would have sent me into a panic. I would have made up some excuse about work or being sick or having to wash my hair. But now, sitting in my clean apartment, wearing jeans that actually fit properly, I felt something different. Not excitement exactly, but not fear either. I'll be there, I said. Mom looked surprised, then pleased. Really? You're sure? I'm sure. That week, I found myself thinking about what I wanted to wear. Not what would hide me best or make me invisible, but what would make me feel confident. I ended up buying a new dress, something I hadn't done in years. It was a simple sundress in a soft blue color that the salesperson said brought out my eyes. It fit perfectly, hugging my body in places that I'd spent years trying to camouflage. Saturday morning, I took extra time getting ready. I did my hair properly, put on makeup that actually enhanced my features instead of trying to hide them. I looked at myself in the mirror and felt ready. The party was already in full swing when I arrived. Dad had strung lights in the backyard, and Mom had set up tables with white tablecloths and small bouquets of flowers. There were maybe 20 people there, aunts and uncles, family friends, a few people I didn't recognize who must have been Camilla's friends. I spotted Jake first, standing by the grill with a beer in his hand, laughing at something Uncle Tom was saying. He looked happy, relaxed. Then I saw Camilla. She was holding court near the dessert table, surrounded by a small group of women who were hanging on her every word. She was wearing a white dress that probably cost more than my car payment, and her hair was pulled back in a perfect low bun. She looked exactly the same as she had a year ago. Polished, put together, intimidating. But this time, I didn't feel small looking at her. "Sarah!" Dad spotted me first and came over with a huge grin. "You look wonderful, sweetheart. Absolutely wonderful." He hugged me tight, and I could hear the pride in his voice. Over his shoulder, I saw Camilla turn at the sound of my name. Our eyes met across the yard, and I watched her expression change from polite interest to something else entirely. Confusion, maybe, or surprise. Jake came over next, leaving his conversation mid-sentence. "Sarah, wow, you look different. Great, you look great." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. "Congratulations on your anniversary." "Thanks. I'm glad you came." He seemed like he wanted to say more, but Camilla appeared at his elbow before he could. "Sarah," she said, her voice as smooth as ever. "How lovely to see you again." She looked me up and down, taking in the new dress, the way I held myself, the confidence I couldn't quite hide. I could practically see her trying to reconcile this version of me with the woman she'd destroyed a year ago. "Camilla," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. "You look well." The conversation moved on to other things, but I could feel her watching me throughout the afternoon. When I helped Mom serve the cake, when I laughed with my cousins, when I complimented Mrs. Rodriguez on her garden, I wasn't performing for her benefit. I was genuinely enjoying myself, but I was aware of her attention. The turning point came when Mom brought out the photo albums. There were pictures from Jake and Camilla's wedding, vacation photos, family gatherings I'd missed. But there were also older pictures, including some from last year's family gatherings that I'd actually attended. "Oh my goodness," Aunt Linda said, holding up a picture from Cousin Mike's graduation party. "Sarah, is this you?" In the photo, I was standing next to Jake, both of us squinting in the sun. I was wearing a baggy sweater and had my arms crossed over my stomach. My smile looked forced, uncomfortable. "That's me," I said, taking the photo. It felt like looking at a stranger. "You look so different now," Linda continued. "What's your secret?" Before I could answer, I heard Camilla's voice from across the group. "Yes, Sarah. What is your secret?" There was something in her tone that made everyone look up. The same calculating quality I remembered from that awful dinner, but tempered now with something that looked almost like uncertainty. "No secret," I said, handing the photo back to Linda. "I just decided to take better care of myself." "Well, you look fantastic," Uncle Tom chimed in. "Doesn't she, Camilla?" Camilla's smile was tight. "Absolutely. Very dedicated." The group moved on to other topics, but I noticed Camilla kept glancing my way. When I went inside to use the bathroom, she followed me. "You've lost weight," she said as I came out of the bathroom. She was leaning against the hallway wall, arms crossed, studying me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "I've gained a lot of other things too," I replied. "Such as?" I looked at her for a long moment. A year ago, this woman had nearly destroyed me with a handful of cruel words. She'd taken aim at my deepest insecurities and hit every target perfectly. But standing here now, I realized something that surprised me. She couldn't hurt me anymore. Not because she'd changed, but because I had. "Confidence," I said finally. "Self-respect. The ability to see myself clearly instead of through other people's eyes." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. For just a moment, her perfect composure slipped. "That's good," she said quietly. "That's really good." I nodded and walked back outside to rejoin the party, leaving her standing alone in the hallway. I didn't need her approval or her apology. I didn't need anything from her at all. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of conversations and laughter. I stayed until the very end, helping Mom clean up, saying goodbye to everyone properly. When I finally left, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd proven anything to Camilla, but because I'd proven something to myself. The party was winding down when I found myself alone in the kitchen, helping Mom wrap up leftover cake. Most of the guests had said their goodbyes, and the backyard was quiet, except for the sound of Dad and Uncle Tom discussing baseball scores while they folded up chairs. I was sealing the last container when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find Camilla standing in the doorway, holding 2 empty wine glasses. For a moment, we just looked at each other in the soft kitchen light. "I wanted to help clean up," she said, though she made no move to do anything other than stand there. "Mom appreciates it," I replied, wiping down the counter. "She always goes overboard with the food." Camilla set the glasses in the sink and moved closer. "Sarah, She stopped, seemed to reconsider whatever she was going to say. "You really do look different." "Thank you." I kept my voice neutral, not unfriendly but not warm either. "I mean it. You look confident, happy." She paused. "I don't think I've ever seen you look happy before." The observation stung a little, mostly because it was probably true. How many family gatherings had I attended over the years where I'd felt like I was just trying to survive until I could leave? How many times had I smiled and nodded and counted the minutes until I could go home and hide? "I am happy," I said, "happier than I've been in a long time." We stood there for a moment in comfortable silence. Through the window, I could see Jake loading chairs into Dad's garage, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. "I owe you an apology," Camilla said suddenly, "for what I said last year, at the dinner." I looked at her, surprised. This wasn't what I'd expected. "You remember that?" "Of course I remember it." She looked uncomfortable for the first time since I'd known her. I was going through a difficult time. That's not an excuse, but it's the truth. I said something terrible to you, and I've regretted it ever since." I considered her words carefully. A year ago, this apology would have meant everything to me. I would have been so grateful for any acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused, so ready to forgive and forget if it meant I could stop carrying around that hurt. Now, it felt different. Nice, but not necessary. Her apology couldn't change what had happened, but more importantly, it couldn't change what had happened because of what she'd said. "I appreciate that," I said, "but you should know. What you said to me that night, it wasn't the worst thing that happened to me. It was the best." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you did me a favor. You held up a mirror and showed me exactly who I'd become. Someone who was hiding. Someone who was afraid. Someone who had given up on herself. It wasn't pretty, but it was true." I moved to the window, looking out at the backyard, where fairy lights twinkled in the growing darkness. "I could have stayed angry at you. I could have let what you said define me, prove that I was everything you thought I was. But instead, I decided to prove you wrong. And you did," she said quietly. "I did, but not for you, for me." I turned back to face her. "I spent so many years waiting for other people to tell me I was worth something, waiting for someone to love me before I could love myself. What you said that night forced me to stop waiting and start doing." Camilla was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "I was wrong about you. You were wrong about a lot of things," I agreed. "But you were right about some things too. I was hiding. I was afraid. I had given up, but you're not anymore." "No," I said, and felt the truth of it settle in my chest, like a warm light. "I'm not anymore." She nodded slowly. "I'm glad. Really glad." We finished cleaning up together in companionable silence. When we were done, we walked outside together to say goodbye to the remaining guests. Jake was by the gate, keys in hand, ready to leave. "Great party," he said, hugging Mom and Dad goodbye. "Thanks for doing this." "Anytime," Mom said. "You know how much we love having everyone together." Jake hugged me last, holding on a little longer than usual. "I'm really proud of you," he said quietly. "I don't know what changed, but whatever it was, I'm glad it did." I smiled at him. This brother who'd always been golden and easy and beloved, who'd never had to fight for his place in the world. "Thanks, Jake. That means a lot." Camilla was waiting by their car, but as I walked past, she caught my arm gently. "Sarah," she said. "Thank you." "For what?" "For showing me that it's possible to change, that it's never too late to become who you're supposed to be." I looked at her for a moment. This woman who'd once seemed so untouchable, so perfectly put together. But I could see cracks in that perfection now, glimpses of someone who might be just as lost as I'd been. "It's not too late," I said. "It's never too late." She smiled then, a real smile that reached her eyes. Maybe we could have coffee sometime. Start over. I'd like that, I said, and meant it. I watched them drive away, then helped my parents finish cleaning up. When everything was put away, I sat on the back porch with them, sharing a beer and watching the stars come out. This was nice, Mom said, leaning against Dad's shoulder. Having everyone together like this. It was, I agreed. Really nice. You seemed different tonight, Dad observed. More yourself. I laughed. I think I'm finally figuring out who that is. Driving home that night, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. The woman who'd sat on her bedroom floor in a rumpled dress, crying over the cruel words of someone who barely knew her. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I remembered fondly but couldn't quite relate to anymore. I thought about Camilla's apology, about Jake's pride, about the way my parents had looked at me all evening, like they were seeing me clearly for the first time in years. But mostly, I thought about the woman I saw in my rearview mirror, someone who knew her own worth, who took up space in the world without apology, who had learned that the only opinion that truly mattered was her own. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled. The woman looking back at me was someone I was proud to be, someone I'd worked hard to become, someone who was no longer afraid to be loved, starting with herself.